I hate flying. I've always hated flying ever since that first family vacation when my parents dragged me onto a plane, telling me it was exciting and fun. But to me, it was the opposite. I was terrified from the start. I remember being completely hysterical on that first flight. The idea of something so massive and heavy just lifting off the ground felt wrong, so unnatural. And it still does. And the banking of the plane. Oh God, when it tilted to the side, and all I could see was clouds one way and the ground far below the other, I thought I'd lose my mind. I couldn't handle how tiny everything suddenly looked the moment we left the ground. It only made me picture the plane stalling midair and dropping back to earth like a rock. I know I embarrassed my parents that day. I felt awful. But my dad told me not to worry. He swore that each time I flew, it would get easier. He said one day flying would be boring, like riding in a car. But that never happened for me. It never got better. The only thing that improved was my ability to push down how terrified I was. I still can't handle sitting at a window seat. If I'm assigned one, I'll beg anyone around me to switch. I remember one time I was seated at an emergency exit row, the kind where the flight attendant has to ask if you're ready to take on that responsibility. Well, she didn't even need to ask. I went straight to her and demanded she move me because there was no way I was taking that seat. Then in March last year, one of my relatives died suddenly in a car accident. The funeral came up fast, and because of work, I didn't have time for my usual plan of traveling by bus or train across the country. I had no choice but to book a flight. It was that or miss the funeral, and there was no way I was skipping it. So I packed light, called a taxi to the airport, and forced myself onto the plane heading for Philly. I usually try to knock back some drinks at the terminal bar before boarding, and then keep drinking during the flight. It helps dull the panic, but only a little, never enough. And on the flight back home that time, I had the single worst turbulence experience of my entire life. At first, it was nothing too bad, just a bit of shaking enough for people like me to grip the armrests and hope it ended soon. But then it got worse and worse, shaking harder and harder the longer it went on. I could feel dread spreading across the cabin, people starting to look around, worried, and I was soaking it all in heart pounding, so loud it felt like everyone could hear it. What scared me the most was when I noticed the flight attendants beginning to look uneasy. Normally they're calm, even in turbulence, and that used to reassure me. But this time their faces told a different story. When I saw them tense up, my stomach dropped. At one point, the shaking was so rough that a flight attendant had to grab both sides of the seats in the aisle just to move forward. Babies were screaming. People were crying, some even praying out loud for God to protect us. I clung to my seat, drinking the little bottles I'd stocked up, and even I whispered a few prayers, despite never being religious. Then came the moment that froze my blood. The plane hit a violent pocket of air and jolted so hard that it literally threw one of the attendants into the air. She smacked her head against the ceiling, and when she came down, she was bleeding. Seeing that turned the whole cabin into chaos. People screamed, others reached out trying to help her. But she was stumbling, dazed, like she couldn't keep her balance, blood dripping down her face, mixing with her mascara. It honestly looked like something out of a horror movie. I was sure that was it. I thought the plane was going down. I even pictured the heartbreak of my relatives back at the funeral. First grieving one loss and then suddenly getting the news I was gone too. It was unbearable, but in that twisted moment, I accepted death. It was strange, horrible kind of calm. Then slowly the turbulence eased off, and when the pilot finally announced that we'd cleared the worst of it, everyone clapped. It wasn't cheesy. It felt real, like we had survived something together. I kept staring at that poor flight attendant, her face a mess of blood and makeup, and I hoped she'd get medical help once we landed, after another long hour in the air. We finally touched down in Philly, and as people got off, almost every passenger thanked the crew. Some hugged them, some cried with relief, some laughed out of pure release. There was this strange bond between us all, like we'd lived through something no one else could understand. One guy even joked it was the most expensive roller coaster ride he'd ever been on, and how Six Flags would never compare. I laughed hard at that, not because it was actually funny, but because the tension finally broke. I really had accepted that I was going to die, and walking away from that flight gave me this new perspective. This feeling of living differently even now. I'm a slightly different person, more positive, more grateful, making the most of my time. But one thing hasn't changed and never will. No matter how different I feel about life, I still hate flying before we begin. I want you to do something for me. Tell me in the comments what country you're watching from right now. I want to know exactly where all of you are, because once you hear this story, you might not feel so safe in your own city anymore. And if you like unsettling true stories that crawl into your head long after the video ends, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Trust me, you're not going to want to miss what's coming next. Story 2. A few years back, I joined a college exchange program for 6 months, where me and some Japanese students swapped places to get a feel for life in each other's countries. And honestly, it was one of the most amazing experiences I ever had. Japan is strange to Western eyes in so many ways, but at the same time, it's full of some of the kindest, most thoughtful people I've ever met. The way they look at life, even in the tiniest details, is fascinating, and it really changed me for the better. But something happened on the flight home from Japan that I'll never forget. And even though it didn't ruin the whole trip, it definitely left a dark shadow over what should have been a really great memory. The trip back was long, painfully long, almost 10 hours in one plane. Then another 10 hours after that, sitting in the same cramped seat with no way to really move or stretch. Gets exhausting, it feels tight, suffocating, and your body just can't relax no matter how hard you try. I guess that's why so many people knock back pills or empty those little liquor bottles just to calm their nerves. I was in the middle of that second flight, the long haul from Southern California to my hometown of Newark. I'd already gone through most of the in-flight movies and was half watching this dumb sci-fi flick with Tom Cruise when I heard something through my headphones. I slid one ear off and realized it was a woman a few rows up, sounding really panicked, speaking in a language I didn't understand. Maybe Chinese, though I couldn't be sure. Whatever it was, she was clearly scared and kept jabbing at the button above her seat, calling for help. A flight attendant came quickly trying to keep calm, but it was obvious she couldn't understand the woman, and the language barrier made it worse after a moment. The woman finally managed to get her point across, and I saw the flight attendant lean into the middle seats, then suddenly jerk back up before rushing off with this look of shock across her face. Seconds later, she came back out calling something that until that moment I'd only ever heard in movies is, "There a doctor on board? Are there any medical professionals here?" That's when I knew it was serious, that this wasn't just someone anxious or sick to their stomach. It was something far worse. The panic in the attendant's eyes confirmed it. Soon she came back with a man from business class who looked like a doctor, white hair, glasses, polo shirt. He leaned in just like the attendant had, then immediately snapped into action. It was clear he knew exactly what to do. He looked around the cabin and ordered the strongest guys nearby to help him. He didn't even ask politely. He just told them what to do, and the way he said it had so much authority that no one argued. They just jumped to help without hesitation. It was impressive the way people can come together in a moment like that. The men lifted someone out of the middle row, carrying them toward the back as they passed. I saw it was an older Asian man, pale as a sheet and completely unresponsive. They laid him down, and the doctor went straight into CPR, pressing hard on his chest, blowing air into his lungs. It was hard to watch, but even harder when one of the big guys started pleading with him, telling him to wake up, to open his eyes, begging him to come back. But after a few moments, it was clear he wasn't coming back. The man had no pulse, he was gone, and you could feel the weight of that realization sink into the entire cabin. Some passengers started crying, others folded their hands and prayed. It was one of the most intense moments I've ever witnessed. Then I noticed something I never knew was even on a plane. The attendants pulled out an actual body bag, a real one, straight out of some war movie, big plastic-looking thing with a zipper up the middle. They helped the doctor and the men lift the man into it before zipping it closed. Then they started moving passengers around. For some reason, they shifted people behind me further up toward the front, even offering upgrades to business and first class. But they never asked me and ended up staying where I was, with a row of seats to myself and two empty rows behind me, before the very back of the plane. I should have realized right then what was about to happen. I could have asked to move, but everything was happening so fast and everyone was under so much stress. I just stayed quiet, thinking it would be easier for them if I didn't make a fuss. But soon I regretted that choice because the men came back, lifted the armrests on the row, directly behind me, leaned the seats back a bit, then gently laid the poor man's body across them. Suddenly I was sitting just meters away from a corpse. I can't describe the feeling it gave me. There was no smell since the death was so recent, but the idea of it alone made my skin crawl. I tried not to look back, but every so often my eyes drifted between the seats, catching sight of that shiny bag and being hit with the knowledge that the man inside was gone. It made me more anxious than ever when we finally landed and people were leaving. One of the attendants stopped me, took down my name, and explained that I'd get money off my next flight for being so patient and quiet about the whole situation. She even said it almost never happens and that they were deeply sorry. It had to be me sitting closest to the body. It was their way of making up for it. But honestly, after that experience, I don't think I want to fly again, not for a very long time. Story 3, hit subscribe button before the next story. Began it as a slow night at Sarasota, Bradenton International Airport in Florida. The night crew are used to quiet shifts, but this one feels especially empty, with not a single traveler moving through the terminals or lounges. Staff working baggage claim or rental car desks are restless and bored, making small talk as they finish the little work that needs to be done. It is early Thursday morning around 3 a.m. on December 19th. The place still carries a faint buzz of holiday cheer, though dulled by the late hour. No doubt the workers are chatting about Christmas plans and looking forward to family time, once their long string of night shifts is finally over. But out beyond the quiet walls, something is racing straight toward them. Something fast and reckless. Something that none of them could have seen coming. The employees working at the National and Alamo rental car counters are seconds away from disaster, but they have no clue. There are no alarms, no warnings, no reason for them to brace themselves. The only hint is a faint rushing noise from outside the building, and then in one brutal instant, it happens. A massive white General Motors pickup truck tears straight through the airport's exterior wall like a missile. The wall shatters into pieces, sending wood and plastic spraying into the baggage claim area. The truck is moving so fast the impact barely slows it down, and it keeps charging forward straight toward the rental car counters. Staff leap from their chairs, scrambling to safety as the vehicle closes in. Their hearts must have stopped for a second, but by some miracle the counters are built tough enough to withstand the impact and the slightly reduced speed of the truck. The vehicle finally shudders to a halt, and the stunned workers realize how close they just came to death. The truck had reportedly swerved off Florida's nearby U.S. Highway 41, crashing through the airport's perimeter fence and cutting across the tarmac before smashing through a cinder block wall, then bursting into the baggage claim area where it came to rest against the rental car desks. Somehow the only injury was to the driver himself. It is hard to believe, but no passengers were standing at the counter waiting to rent a car. If anyone had been there, they almost certainly would have been crushed between the heavy truck and the desk, suffering fatal injuries. One witness, Frederick J. Bachelot, the president and CEO of the airport, said we actually had a late flight, but no one else was here in the baggage claim area. Except a couple of workers. If this happened during the day, it would have been a very different story. The driver, later identified as Juan Masivas, was taken to a hospital while investigators looked over the wreckage. The crash caused heavy damage to the baggage claim. Belts, the ceiling, windows, doors, and walls, racking up about $250,000 in damages. Before this terrifying accident, Masivas had already been spotted driving recklessly on U.S. Route 41, according to the Florida Highway Patrol. Strangely enough, alcohol didn't appear to be a factor this time, even though reports later revealed he had multiple prior DUI charges, as well as arrests for driving on a suspended or expired license. It's hard not to think of how easily this could have been far worse luck and timing kept dozens of people safe that night. It's a miracle that no one was hurt, but that doesn't take away from the truth that for a few terrifying minutes in the early hours of December 19th, the airport staff felt absolute fear crash straight through their quiet night. Story 4 hit subscribe button before the next story began. Stephen Sylvester and Pradeep Sangha were two men who knew airports and air travel very well. Both of them worked long hours as taxi drivers, taking travelers along the same routes to and from Heathrow Airport in London during the early 1980s. Whether the two men ever knew each other personally is a mystery, but there is no doubt their paths must have crossed more than once. Yet the thing that forever linked them was not friendship, it was tragedy. Both men were murdered in separate attacks only 6 months apart, both stabbed to death in brutal unsolved cases that remain a mystery to this day. Here we will look at the known facts of both murders and wonder what conclusions can be drawn about their violent and untimely deaths. Stephen Sylvester was 39 when he was killed. He worked as a minicab driver for Skyway Minicabs, a small company based near Hounslow Underground Station only 4 miles from Heathrow Airport. Stephen usually worked nights, and in the early morning of November the 17th, 1983, he had just driven a passenger from the airport to nearby Feltham. He returned to the office around 2:30 a.m., where a dispatcher and a few drivers had just finished their shifts and gone home. Leaving him alone sometime during that next hour, he must have gone back out for another fare police. Believe he either answered a phone call or picked up someone who came directly to the office. This ride would be his last. For some reason, Stephen ended up in the backseat of his own car, something taxi drivers almost never do. But when he did, a violent struggle broke out. He was stabbed repeatedly until his life slipped away. The killer then dragged his body from the back seat, shoved it into the trunk, and drove the cab to Heathrow, abandoning it in the short-stay car park at Terminal 3 around 4 in the morning. At that time, the lot's ground floor was mainly used by airport night shift workers, which raises the question, was the killer an employee, or did he simply flee the country right after? Either way, this was not a place to hide a body. Vehicles there were checked often for tickets and payments and quickly towed. If rules were broken, it almost seemed like the killer wanted the body to be found, wanted people to see what he had done. Whoever he was, he would have been covered in blood. Knife killings are quick but messy, and someone with stained clothes surely would have been noticed unless he wore all black or cleaned himself up in a public restroom where a disabled stall could give him the privacy and time he needed. Police only began searching for Stephen 4 days later when his employers or relatives reported him missing. Once they looked, it did not take long to find his cab and the grim discovery of his bloodied body stuffed inside the trunk. Detectives were baffled by the strange, isolated nature of the crime, until only 6 months later, another driver was murdered in the very same area. This second victim was Pradeep Sangha, a South Asian driver who worked for Blue Star Minicabs based near Hounslow. Pradeep was known as a kind man who often helped his father-in-law by driving his cab on weekday evenings back then. Private hire taxis did not have radios, so drivers had to return to the office after each job for their next fare. On Friday night, March 30th, 1984, Pradeep had already completed about a dozen fares when he came back to the office around midnight. Then a call came in from a payphone near some traffic lights on the Great West Road asking for a cab to Feltham. Curiously, the phone was just a short walk from the office, so why bother calling? Maybe the caller wanted to avoid being seen at the same time. A soldier and two young women walked into the office also asking for a cab to Feltham. This confused police later, since the log sheet did not make clear which job Pradeep took. First, near that same payphone was a wine bar called the Boom Boom and a restaurant called Heathrow Tandoori. So perhaps the caller had been drinking or eating nearby. But strangely, no one ever saw Pradeep arrive there to collect his passenger. What happened after remains unclear. The timeline made little sense. But by the early hours, his car was found abandoned, nearly out of gas, on a slip road off the A30, near Heathrow's southern security fence. The keys were missing and someone had tried but failed to force open the trunk, thanks to a fault in the mechanism between 12:30 and 2 a.m. The busy road would have seen many lorries passing, So it's likely someone spotted the car and called police when officers arrived just after 2 a.m. They found Pradeep slumped behind the passenger seat of his cab. He had been stabbed more than 30 times in a frenzied attack, his credit cards were gone, and some cash was missing. Perhaps it was robbery, but the similarities to Stephen's murder made it seem more likely that the killer was the same man, just changing details to throw off investigators. Detectives even considered racism as a motive since Stephen was Afro-Caribbean and Pradeep was South Asian, though there was little evidence of that. Police released a statement saying they wished to question a large man, but gave no reason why. Later, it was revealed that in Stephen's cab, investigators found a rare replica commando dagger hidden under the passenger seat. It had no fingerprints and seemed deliberately planted, perhaps as a calling card. In Pradeep's case, a U.S. Army trench knife was found 2 miles from the scene. Blood tests confirmed it was the murder weapon, and even stranger, Pradeep's ceremonial Sikh knife. A kirpan with a blue band was missing, taken almost certainly as a trophy. Many puzzling details remain small. Keys found in Stephen's car turned out to belong to a clock, though the clock itself was never located. And then there was the mystery caller at the payphone, so close to the office. Who could they have been? Why not walk in unless they feared being seen or recorded? Truck drivers later described seeing a man near Pradeep's stranded taxi in his late 30s or early 40s, gray or sandy hair, wearing a gray suit. No other vehicle was spotted nearby, meaning this must have been the passenger, and if so, also the killer, who stabbed Pradeep and took his knife. 37 years have passed since Stephen was killed on his night shift, and police are still no closer to solving the case. So many questions remain. But one thing seems chillingly certain. A cold, calculating person with a fascination for knives planned and carried out both murders and escaped justice. Even now, it is possible this man walks around London, living an ordinary life, hiding dark memories of those 2 nights in 1983 and 1984. Maybe he even has a small locked cabinet somewhere inside his home where he keeps Pradeep's ceremonial dagger, running his fingers along the brass and reliving the thrill of taking a life. Perhaps he still smiles at the thought that he left clues, was seen by witnesses, and yet fooled the police of one of the world's most respected forces. In that sense, he sits in the same dark corner of history as Jack the Ripper and other killers who were never caught. We can only hope that someday the families of Stephen Sylvester and Pradeep Sangha find peace, even though their loved ones died in such brutal and mysterious ways. Story 5. Hit subscribe button before the next story begin. Morocco is one of the most beautiful places I've ever seen in my life. From golden beaches to endless deserts, from shady green forests to old trading markets and bazaars, it is just a place that looks like it belongs in a dream. I never imagined the country would even have forests. So if you're surprised by that, don't worry, I was too. Morocco has a way of constantly surprising you, and it's not only the sights that stuck with me. The sounds of local music, the groaning of camels, and the sharp snaps of their riders, all mixed together with smells of spices, incense, and perfumes that floated everywhere. But there were also less pleasant smells. Things like hashish smoke. I've never been into smoking myself. I like to keep fit and healthy. But back in uni, I had friends who smoked, so I know the smell. Well, Morocco is full of it. After a 3-week trip, my girlfriend and I were running late for our flight back home, which was no surprise since we are both hopelessly disorganized. The night before, a fellow traveler gave us strange advice. He told us to get off the bus halfway, buy fresh tickets, and then continue our journey. When I asked why, he just tapped his nose like it was some big secret. He was a bit of a smug idiot, to be honest, and I wasn't about to follow advice from someone like that, especially when we had no money or time to waste. So the next morning, we just boarded the bus from Chefchaouen, the last leg of our journey to Rabat, the capital. It was a long and very uncomfortable trip in a bus that looked older than both of us put together, and to make matters worse, for the first time. On the whole trip, I had eaten something that didn't agree with me. By the time we got to the airport, I felt awful. We had maybe an hour to spare before our flight, so we hurried through check-in, probably looking nervous and restless to everyone around us, which was not the best thing to do while traveling abroad. On top of that, We had a large amount of Moroccan money to exchange into British pounds, and the cashier gave us a long, suspicious look, as if wondering why we had so much cash and were rushing to leave the country. I was also rushing for another reason. I was desperate to find a toilet after that bad lamb tagine I'd eaten the night before. But fate had other plans as security officers pulled us aside for a detailed bag check. Just what we didn't need. They went through everything and then called over another guard to check again, while I foolishly mentioned that I badly needed the restroom in my broken Arabic. I tried to explain, pointing to my stomach, making faces of pain. He looked at me and asked in broken English, "Have you swallowed anything?" I thought he meant, had I taken medicine? So I nodded and told him I had taken something for my stomach. But it didn't work. It took me a moment to realize the huge misunderstanding. He thought I was a drug smuggler. My stomach dropped. He must have seen our tickets and knew we came from Chefchaouen, a town known for producing hashish. He quickly told me I would need further inspection before I could board the plane. I wasn't worried about them finding anything since I had nothing illegal, but I was terrified about the delay making us miss our flight. And worse, I started to fear the thorough inspection they might insist on, if you know what I mean. At first, my problem was food poisoning. Now fear itself was making me worry about my underwear situation. I begged to go to the toilet, but then two armed police appeared with sniffer dogs and we were marched to the side of the security hall. My girlfriend was nearly in tears and I felt sick with dread. Then I was led into an interview room where an immigration officer who spoke perfect English started poking my stomach while asking me questions. He asked if I knew Chef Chowan was a big producer of hashish. I said yes. He asked if I had been offered any during the trip, and I told the truth that I had been offered some big mistake. He turned to his colleagues, smiled, and said something in Arabic that I was sure meant, "We caught one," after more talking. They told me a doctor would examine me. I begged again, saying it was all a misunderstanding. But they didn't believe me every time I asked to go to the toilet. They became more certain I was hiding drugs. My girlfriend was crying, and the guards seemed to enjoy the idea that they had caught someone. They acted like they'd get a reward for it. Finally, they said the doctor had arrived, but instead of a man in a white coat, only the two original guards appeared. They told me to follow them, or I'd be jailed as a smuggler. I had no choice. They led me deep into a detention area where I saw something shocking, a steel toilet with no flush. It dawned on me instantly, this was where suspected smugglers were made to pass whatever they had swallowed, so it could be inspected. Then the officer told me sternly that now they would see if I was lying. To my surprise, I actually thanked him, since I was desperate for relief by then. But when I asked if I could have some privacy, he snapped, pulled on a latex glove, and warned me that if I didn't push it out myself, he would do it. I was horrified. He was a huge man with massive hands trembling. I nodded and sat down as I sat on that strange toilet. I realized something. This was my chance at a small revenge. They thought they had me cornered, but instead they would have to endure the most disgusting proof of their mistake. I pulled down my pants, sat down, and let the bad tagine explode out of me. The relief was so overwhelming, I couldn't even care that he was watching through the plexiglass. I even looked up at him with a smirk, as if to say, "Told you." So after a moment, he shook his head and walked away, leaving me there to finish when I finally returned to my girlfriend. She was still shaking, repacking our luggage when she saw me. She burst into tears, hugged me tightly, and begged, "Let's just get out of here. I don't want to stay here another second." I couldn't have agreed more. Luckily for once, our terrible luck worked in our favor. The flight was delayed for several hours and we managed to get on it with no trouble. But that experience taught me more than any guidebook could I learn. There are awful cops everywhere that knowing your rights is just as important as carrying your passport, and that you should always keep some emergency cash in case you ever need to bribe someone in a foreign airport bathroom to save yourself from disaster and humiliation. Story 6, hit subscribe button before the next story. Begin I don't fly anymore. I used to fly a lot, actually. It was a big part of my old job traveling around the country to pitch investment opportunities at meetings full of wealthy hedge fund managers. It was easy work, really, and paid way more than it should have. But now I work from home and I drive everywhere. I mean, everywhere. I live in New York City, but my parents retired down in Florida, and I still drive down there to see them 3 times a year. It's a long, boring trip, and sometimes it's downright miserable. But I'd rather sit through bad roadside tacos and stomach flu than get on a plane again. And I'll tell you why. This was a regular flight from LaGuardia heading down to Houston. Just another trip to schmooze oil investors in Texas. I had a window seat in business class, and takeoff was smooth. Nothing unusual. I'd done this routine 100 times. I flipped through the in-flight magazine, glanced at the drink options, and tried to relax. I'd been up since about 5:30 to make the flight, and I am not a morning person. So as soon as I could, I shut the window shade, leaned back, and tried to sleep to be fresh for the afternoon meeting. But right as I was drifting off, I heard a loud pop sound in my sleepy state. I figured some businessman had ordered champagne for breakfast. I glanced around expecting to see an ice bucket and glasses, but nothing like that was happening. Then a sinking thought hit me, and to quiet my nerves, I opened the window flap and checked the left wing. I was expecting it to be fine since nothing had ever gone wrong before, despite the occasional flash of fear. But it wasn't fine. The sound had been exactly what I dreaded. The engine was belching smoke, a heavy black stream trailing behind us. My stomach dropped. I waved over a flight attendant and quietly pointed out the window, not wanting to spark chaos. Her face went pale instantly, and she hurried straight toward the cockpit. A few moments later, more passengers caught sight of the smoke, and shouts erupted across the cabin. People crowded over to the left side, screaming and panicking, while the attendants struggled to keep order, trying to reassure everyone and keep themselves calm at the same time. But it wasn't working. The noise in the cabin reached a breaking point right before the pilot's voice came over the intercom, and that moment was surreal. People were losing their minds, but the captain sounded calm, almost detached, like this was routine for him. I guess that's the training they go through. He told us to stay seated and remain calm, and announced we'd be making an emergency landing at the closest airport, which turned out to be in Norfolk, Virginia. It was the longest few minutes of my life, but somehow the landing went smoothly. No fireball, no chaos, just a rougher than usual touchdown. The worst part of the day ended up being that I had to reschedule the meeting. But even though it ended safely, I can't shake the memory, because in those minutes I was convinced the plane was going to explode and fall out of the sky at 500 miles an hour. It was pure terror, and no matter how many times I tried afterward, I could never bring myself to fly again. So like I said, now I drive everywhere, and as much as it drags on, it's still better than sitting frozen with panic on a runway, waiting for the engines to burst into flames. Story 7 hit subscribe button before the next story begin. I work as an air traffic controller at Sky Harbor International Airport in Phoenix, Arizona. It's the job I dreamed about ever since I was a kid. My dad used to drive me to the same airport just to sit in the car and watch planes thunder over us as they came into land. At first, I wanted to be a pilot flying. Those giant machines seemed like the most amazing thing in the world, but I didn't have the perfect 20/20 vision needed to qualify. It crushed me at the time, but my dad reminded me there was more than one way to build a career around airplanes. So I focused in school, got through college, and after years of working hard, I landed the job. I still love guiding planes safely through the skies, but what I'm about to share is the story of one night back in July of 1997, when I was young, new to the job, and faced something I still can't explain, and I'll do my best to keep it clear without too much technical stuff, because even for me, it's full of gaps that night. I was sitting in the tower, struggling to stay awake, while sipping cup after cup of black coffee. I used to drink 7 or 8 in a shift just to fight off the tiredness in this profession. When you start out, you don't really have a choice. You get stuck on night shifts for months since traffic is lighter at night. It gives rookies a chance to practice and get the hang of guiding planes before moving on to the daytime, when things are much busier, with multiple aircraft in holding patterns thousands of feet up and landings stacking up one after another. And with lives depending on every word we say, it's a huge responsibility. You don't need me to tell you a single mistake could cost hundreds of lives. And yes, we go through constant health and psych checks to make sure we're fit for the job anyway. One quiet night, I was at my screen with my supervisor on break when I saw a new blip appear on my radar. Usually the screen shows the blip along with the flight number and information on where it came from, the size and type of plane. But this time it looked nothing like the normal codes. Instead, it was a string of strange letters and numbers. Something like ZAX 000X001. Not exactly that, but enough to make me realize instantly it was unusual. So I switched my radio to the frequency the aircraft should have been on, then almost jumped out of my chair when a horrible screech poured through the headset. It was a high whining noise, just a step away from bursting my eardrums. I yanked it off and asked a colleague to check. They tried and heard the exact same thing yelping as they ripped the headset off. They told me the aircraft's comms must be malfunctioning, but insisted we still had to try to guide it in. Otherwise, there could be a disaster. So like the nervous trainee I was, I followed protocol, started giving directions for range and heading to the runway. But all I could hear back was the screech changing slightly in pitch and sometimes clicking noises mixed in. And when I looked at the radar, I realized something was even stranger. The blip wasn't moving smoothly like every other aircraft. It was jerking forward, stopping, then moving again over and over. No plane I knew of could do that. I leaned over the tower windows searching for any sign of its lights, but there was nothing, just empty sky where flashing navigation lights should have been. And this isn't a job where you can casually ask for help. Everyone else is busy with their own tasks, and I wanted to prove I was capable, so I kept my mouth shut. Then things got even weirder. The blip started sliding sideways across the radar, like it was moving laterally at a shocking speed, faster than anything I'd ever seen. I guessed it had to be over 1,000 miles per hour, a move that should have created a massive sonic boom, but there was none. The radar showed it darting across the sky. Then just as suddenly the blip vanished. It was gone. I barely had time to process it before another perfectly normal flight appeared, and I had to shift focus back to work. I didn't mention the incident to anyone, not wanting to seem crazy or weak from the night shift. I did file a report because protocol required it, but nothing ever came of it. It was tucked away and forgotten by everyone but me. I still think about it after all these years, and I've never seen anything like it again. I'm not saying it was a UFO or aliens. I've never believed in that stuff, but I can't deny it was unexplained. Maybe it was some kind of experimental military craft, maybe just a glitch in the radar, or maybe something else entirely. I don't know, but the memory has never left me, and I doubt it ever will. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. If you got a story to submit, be sure to submit them to my subreddit or Let's Read Official and give and receive feedback from the community, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And join my Discord, interact with me and other listeners directly. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations for just $1 a month on Patreon, and maybe even pick up some Let's Read merch on Spreadshirt, and check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all these stories in long compilation form and save huge on data located anywhere you listen to podcasts. Links in the bio. Thanks so much, friends, and remember, do the crab dance, especially short stories for viewers. How are watching till now, Delta Airlines Flight 2998 bound for Atlanta, Georgia, with continued service to Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. All carry-on items should now be stowed securely, either in an overhead bin. This happened around 10 years ago when I was about 7 years old. My family has always traveled a lot. So even at that age, I had already been on airplanes more times than I could remember. I also knew the layout of our local airport pretty well, since I'd been through it so often that night. We arrived at our gate about 2 hours early. I sat there for a while before realizing I needed to use the bathroom. I told my parents. And since they knew I was familiar with the airport, they let me go on my own. It was about a 5-minute walk to the main bathrooms, but when I got there, I found they were completely roped off. Apparently, they were being cleaned since it was around 3 a.m., and that was the only bathroom I knew about. Instead of going back, I made the mistake of wandering around trying to find another one, and I ended up in an area of the airport I wasn't familiar with. There was a hallway a bit separated from the rest of the place, and I saw a bathroom sign at the end of it. I started walking down, but when I was halfway through, I suddenly saw a head peek out from around the corner. It was a man. He looked right at me and said, hey, kid, come over here without thinking. I kept walking toward him. At the time, I just assumed he was an airport worker, maybe someone who could help me find the bathroom, but instead he told me he was lost and needed me to follow him so I could help him find his gate in my little 7-year-old brain. I not only believed him, but got excited. I thought it was cool that I could actually help an adult find their way. Since I knew the airport better than most kids, I told him I'd help. But first I wanted to go back and let my parents know, not even as a safety thing, just because I wanted to brag about helping someone. I turned to leave and promised I'd be quick. That's when he started yelling that there wasn't enough time, and his flight was leaving soon, but I told him again I'd be fast as soon as I left the hallway. I looked back and saw the man running out of it, heading straight down the stairs that led to the airport exit. I didn't really understand why, but I thought it was strange. I found another bathroom, used it, and quickly forgot about the whole thing. Never told my parents and went on with the trip years later. Though when I was older, I was telling coworkers about weird things from our childhoods, and that memory suddenly came rushing back. It hit me all at once what almost happened, and the realization made my stomach turn. I had been so close to real danger and didn't even know it at the time. I should have told my parents right away. But I just hope that man didn't try to do the same thing to another kid who wasn't as lucky as me later on. When I was in college, I picked up a part-time job at my local airport to earn some extra cash, since most of my money went straight to school. I worked as a ramp agent, which basically meant loading and unloading bags from planes. Every once in a while, we also handled bodies being transported in cargo bins. This night was one of those nights to make it worse. It was pouring rain and lightning was hitting close by. My manager assigned me to unload the last plane of the night, and I was the one who had to climb inside the storage bin to move cargo. I tried to sit as far away as possible from the big white box that held the body. I was tired and just wanted to get home, but the conveyor belt moved painfully slow, so I had no choice but to take my time. About 5 minutes into it, the lightning got more frequent and louder. I had earbuds in, but the next strike was so close it knocked me down. The noise was deafening when I looked up. I froze in shock. The box with the body in it had burst open, and the corpse inside was now sitting upright like it had just forced itself up. The lid was thrown across the floor. I panicked and bolted out of the bin, running down the ramp as my coworkers screamed that the plane had been struck by lightning inside. I explained what I saw, and the color drained from their faces. They looked horrified. My manager told me to go home, and I left still shaking on the drive. I couldn't figure out if I'd really seen it or if my exhausted mind was playing tricks later. One of my coworkers texted me saying he went back to the bin and saw the lid was off, but the body wasn't sitting up anymore. That confirmed at least part of what I saw. I even researched whether lightning could cause muscles in a dead body to contract and make it sit up, but I found nothing to explain it to this day. I don't know if it was lightning fatigue or something else entirely, but I quit the job the very next morning. I couldn't deal with the thought of it ever happening again. And then there was another trip. I'll never forget. I live in Portland, Oregon, but because of my work, I travel constantly across the country for events my company pays for flights, but always books the cheapest options, which meant uncomfortable travel and strange encounters. I got used to it, figuring as long as I reached my destination, it was fine. But one Sunday night after finishing a weekend job in Dallas, I boarded a flight back home. My route was from Dallas to Sacramento, then Sacramento to Portland. I was already exhausted when I dragged myself onto the plane and took a window seat in a nearly empty row. The only other person sitting with me was a middle-aged man. He looked normal enough, though his clothes were a bit torn up. We exchanged small talk for a few minutes before I leaned back to rest. I had my phone out to watch something when I noticed him glancing over his shoulder toward me. At first I brushed it off, thinking he just wanted to look out the window, but then I heard him mumbling like, "Oh, great, just ignore me." Then it happened more than once, and it made me uneasy. Eventually I saw him scribbling furiously in a leather notebook. Curious, I peeked and realized with shock he was writing about me. My name was clearly on the page, probably from when I told him earlier. I couldn't make out the rest of the words, but the fact he was filling a page about me was disturbing. I couldn't sleep after that. When we landed in Sacramento, people started getting off, but he didn't move. He just sat there with his head down. It was our rou's turn to leave, and I finally spoke up, telling him I had a connecting flight. But still he didn't move. Then he muttered in a low voice, "I'm gonna follow you. You're not leaving this airport alive." I tried to laugh it off as a joke, but his tone was deadly serious. I quickly gathered my stuff and got off, but realized almost immediately he was following me. When I walked faster, he did too soon. I was practically running toward my next gate, with him just behind me when I reached the counter. I told the staff in a firm voice that I didn't know the man standing beside me. At first they laughed, thinking I was joking. But after seeing the fear in my eyes, they took me seriously. They checked our boarding passes and then quietly made some calls. Within minutes, they ushered me onto the plane early, shutting the door before he could follow. Later, when the rest of the passengers boarded, a woman behind me said the man had completely lost control after I left, screaming and pulling at his own hair until police arrived to remove him. The realization hit me hard that he might have actually wanted to kill me. I never heard what happened to him, but I can only hope he got the help he clearly needed. He could not get over how someone could appear so official and still be completely fake. Later, the larger investigation showed that Rebecca's plan was not just about stealing from passengers. She had been collecting company information from business travelers for months. By pretending to rebook tickets, she got her hands on sensitive files and then sold them to competitors or even foreign groups. Thomas never discovered if she had been working on her own or as part of a bigger network. But what he learned was that airports, no matter how many rules and checks they showed, were still places where criminals studied travelers as carefully as businesses studied their customers. So to Rebecca, wherever you are now, still walking airport hallways with your flawless fake badge and confident smile, tricking travelers with your routine, know this: your disguise will not protect you forever. Let us never meet again. Music. Patricia Williams had never felt this tired in all of her 29 years as a nurse. The last 3 weeks had been nothing but long shifts at Chicago General Hospital, where flu season and staff shortages had pushed every worker far past their limits. At last, she sank into seat 14A on the overnight flight from Chicago to San Francisco, closing her eyes and already imagining the long hours of rest she would get once she reached her sister's place. The large Boeing 777 was nearly full, as usual for the 11:47 p.m. flight, filled with business travelers and people trying to make the most of their time. Patricia had picked the window seat not for the view — she planned to sleep the whole way — but because it gave her the best chance of being left alone. As passengers boarded, she noticed the mix of travelers: business people juggling phones and luggage, college students with heavy bags and sleepy faces, and parents calming restless kids. The seat beside her stayed empty as boarding went on, and she began to hope she might have the row to herself. That hope ended when a man walked up just before the cabin doors closed. He looked about 40, dressed neatly in business casual clothes, with tidy hair and a polished smile that suggested he dealt with people often. "Excuse me," he said, showing his boarding pass and checking the numbers. "Looks like I'm in 14B, right next to you." Patricia smiled and moved her things so he could sit. He placed his carry-on above and sat down, making light comments about the late departure and how tough red-eye flights could be. His tone was friendly but not too much, and Patricia liked that he seemed to understand the rule of overnight flights. Keep it short and let others rest. "I'm Robert, by the way," he added after buckling his belt. "Business trip to San Francisco." "Patricia," she answered, "visiting family." As the plane backed away from the gate, Robert took out a tablet and started working through files, looking ready to spend the flight on business. Patricia leaned back, slid on her mask, and relaxed while the steady noise of the engines and the dim lights made the perfect setting to drift off. She had been asleep for maybe 40 minutes when a gentle tap on her shoulder woke her. Lifting the mask, she found Robert looking at her with an apologetic smile. "I'm really sorry to wake you," he said quietly. She realized that people like Robert watched and studied their targets the same way she carefully studied medical cases, searching for weak points and ways to take advantage of kindness and trust. Months later, when Patricia finally took her delayed trip to visit her sister, she traveled with a stronger sense of how personal details could be used against her by people who wanted to cause harm. She had learned to be careful of strangers who seemed too friendly, to hold back her private details, and to pay attention to her instincts whenever something felt wrong. The situation also showed her how new technology and social media had created easy hunting grounds for people who could learn everything about their victims before ever meeting them. Robert's careful mix of online watching and in-person tricks showed how predators had grown more advanced, while police were still working to understand and stop them. For Patricia, the most troubling part was not Robert's crimes, but how easily her caring nature had been used against her. His fake story about sitting with an anxious wife had tapped into her nursing instincts and her wish to comfort others. From this, she learned that being kind did not mean making herself vulnerable, and that keeping herself safe from people like him was not selfish but necessary. She began to check stories before agreeing to help strangers, to always guard her belongings, even in safe spaces, and to trust her professional instincts when someone's words and actions did not match. Years later, Patricia became a voice for traveler, safety, and privacy, speaking at events about how predators use social media and personal information to target strangers. She explained that the best defense against these skilled criminals was knowing their methods and having the courage to put safety above politeness. Her message to travelers was straightforward and vital. Real requests for help never require personal details, and anyone who knows too much about your life without reason is a danger, not a friend. Air travel should be safe, not a place where people are hunted with practiced precision. So to Robert, wherever you sit in prison or plan your next scam with fake names and false stories, the skies are not yours to hunt in, and your research cannot save you from the punishment you deserve. Let us never meet again. Michelle Thompson had finally reached her limit with airline delays. The 26-year-old high school history teacher from Portland had been stuck at Denver International Airport for 8 hours because strong thunderstorms had shut down flights across the Rocky Mountain area. Her connecting flight to Boston, where she was supposed to speak at a teaching conference the next morning, had been canceled along with dozens of others, leaving hundreds of angry passengers scattered through the terminal like victims of a travel disaster. The gate area looked like a crowded camp, families spread out on the floor, using coats and carry-ons as beds. Business travelers bent over laptops, trying to save meetings or rebook their schedules. Children cried on and off while parents tried to stay calm, though no one was fooled. The air conditioning could not keep up with the body heat of so many stranded people, leaving the place hot and making everyone's irritation worse. Michelle had found a spot near gate B32 where she had been sitting for 3 hours after learning her hotel voucher was useless. Every nearby hotel was already filled by other stranded travelers. The 24-hour restaurants in the airport had run out of most food by 2 a.m., leaving only overpriced snack bars and vending machines that mocked the hungry with their few expensive choices. At 3:17 a.m., as Michelle half slept in an uncomfortable plastic chair with her purse held tightly against her chest, a man in maintenance coveralls walked toward her part of the gate. He looked to be in his 50s, with hands that showed years of hard work and a face that carried the tired steadiness of someone used to long night shifts. His coveralls had the Denver International Airport logo, and he carried a toolbox that looked well used. A badge on a cord hung from his chest pocket, though in the dim light Michelle could not read it clearly. "Excuse me, miss," he said softly, careful not to wake the sleeping passengers nearby. "I notice you have been here quite a while. Are you stuck because of the weather delays?" Michelle looked up from her small space on the floor, glad for a human voice that was not full of complaints or arguments. His tone was kind and understanding, a welcome change from the stress she had heard all night. "8 hours and counting," Michelle answered, stretching her sore muscles. "My flight to Boston was canceled. There's nothing available until tomorrow afternoon." The man's name tag said Carl. He shook his head, looking sorry. "These delays are terrible. The airlines barely do anything, and then passengers are left in spaces never meant for overnight stays." Michelle felt grateful someone truly understood. Most airport staff she met had given her empty apologies and passed the blame. Carl seemed to see the human side of what was happening. "The thing is," Carl went on, glancing around the busy gate, "we have employee rest areas most passengers never hear about. Technically, they're not for travelers, but in times like this, some of us let people in who really need real rest." Michelle felt a small spark of hope for the first time that night. The thought of lying down on something better than a plastic chair felt like heaven. "Really?" she asked. "That would be amazing. I have a presentation tomorrow and just need a few hours of real sleep." Carl nodded. "It's nothing fancy, just plain bunks and a couple of vending machines. But it's quiet, and much better than out here with all this noise." Michelle quickly gathered her things as Carl explained the area was in a part of the airport meant only for employees. "I can get you in, no problem," he told her. "I've worked here 15 years. I know which spots are checked and which aren't." They walked away from the gate, past dark shops and empty seats, into a side of the airport Michelle had never seen. The hallways grew plainer, with white walls, buzzing fluorescent lights, and signs that read, "Restricted access." "Is it much farther?" Michelle asked, exhausted but pulled forward by the thought of sleep. "Just around this corner," Carl said, swiping his card at another locked door. It was made for night crews originally. They entered a hallway lined with storage and utility rooms. The smell of cleaners and machinery filled the air. Michelle noticed they had not met any other workers, though Carl had said the night team was always around. "Where is everyone?" she asked, starting to feel uneasy about how empty it was. Carl stopped at another door, this one marked only with a small sign that read, "Employee Break Room." He slid his card but paused. "Night crew's small," he explained. "Most are fixing weather damage. This part stays empty." He opened the door and Michelle immediately saw something was wrong. The room did not look like a rest area at all. Instead of bunks and vending machines, there was one folding chair, a metal table, and walls covered with screens and cameras. "This isn't a rest area," Michelle said, stepping back toward the door. Carl's look changed in an instant. The friendly worker was gone, replaced by eyes that were cold and sharp. He blocked her path, his stance now threatening. "You're right," he said flatly. "This isn't a rest area. This is where I bring people who trust too easily." Michelle's thoughts raced as she realized the trap. Carl had used her tiredness and desperation, offering what she needed most to pull her away. His uniform, key card, and calm knowledge of the airport had made her trust him without question. "What do you want?" she asked, trying to sound steady while her heart pounded. Carl smiled, but it held no kindness. "I want you to see how airports are filled with tired people who make bad choices. You followed a stranger because he offered you comfort. How many others do you think have done the same? Michelle knew then he had done this before. His sure steps, his smooth lies, and this hidden room proved it. The cameras, she said quickly, pointing to the walls. Security will see us. Carl laughed. Those aren't airport feeds. They're mine. I like watching passengers, studying them, choosing who to target. Michelle felt sick. He was no random predator. He had built a whole system to watch and trap victims. But then Michelle heard something outside. Voices echoing down the hallway, keys jingling, footsteps drawing closer. Maintenance sweep, a woman's voice called. All staff report for shift change. Carl's confident face cracked. They're early, he muttered. Shift change isn't for another hour. Michelle did not wait. She screamed as loud as she could, hoping someone heard. Instantly, footsteps rushed closer and someone banged on the door. Security! A man shouted. Open this door now! Carl cursed and turned toward a back exit Michelle had not noticed before. This isn't over, he hissed. I know your flight. I know where you live. Before she could move, the main door burst open. 3 airport security officers rushed in, followed by a woman in a supervisor's uniform. Carl disappeared through the back, but the officers chased him while one stayed with Michelle. Are you hurt? He asked quickly, looking around at the strange equipment in her shaking body. Michelle dropped into the folding chair, her legs unable to stand. I'm okay, she said, but Carl tricked me. He said there was a rest area. He's been watching passengers. The supervisor stared at the equipment with alarm. This is not airport property, she said. Someone has been running an illegal surveillance system in our restricted spaces. The investigation revealed Carl's full setup. His equipment could link into airport cameras and passenger databases. He had used his access for months to track travelers, keeping profiles on them. On his computer, police found files on dozens of passengers, especially women traveling alone, with notes about their flights, gates, and even hotel bookings. He had mainly preyed on stranded travelers during delays, when people were most desperate. The room Michelle entered was not his only one. Authorities found 3 more secret rooms, each with gear watching busy airport areas. Carl himself was caught trying to escape through the maintenance tunnels. He had been a worker for 12 years, slowly building his hidden network while looking like a normal employee. Police later learned he had attacked at least 6 passengers in 2 years. Some victims had stayed silent from fear or shame, and others who spoke up were ignored, since Carl's badge and uniform made him look trustworthy. Michelle's choice to scream for help when she heard the maintenance sweep had not only saved her from an attack, but also uncovered a bigger problem that showed serious flaws in airport security. The case pushed airports to change how they checked employees entering restricted areas and how they handled background checks for staff with access to sensitive places. Michelle's story showed that predators could use real authority and trusted positions to create traps in places passengers believed were safe. For Michelle, the event changed how she thought about travel and safety. She understood that tiredness and stress could weaken good judgment, making even smart, educated people easy targets for those who knew how to manipulate human psychology. The conference talk she was supposed to give was delayed, but later she spoke at many safety events, sharing her story. Her message was clear. People should always question authority figures who offer help that seems too convenient or involves being taken away from public spaces. She reminded travelers that real airport workers would never lead passengers into private areas without proper permission and oversight. Actual rest areas for staff always had rules and safety measures and would never include hidden rooms filled with secret equipment. In the years that followed, Michelle became a strong voice for better airport training and awareness programs for travelers. She worked with police to teach others how to recognize suspicious behavior and helped build steps for reporting shady actions by airport staff. Her experience with Carl showed her that predators often study their victims closely, sometimes even more than victims pay attention to them. She learned the best protection against skilled criminals was knowing their tricks and trusting instincts when something felt off, even when tiredness and stress made the offer of help sound too good to resist. The closed-off tunnels and restricted areas of airports might look like spaces only real workers would use, but Michelle discovered that the most dangerous people often wore real uniforms and used real badges, hiding their traps in plain sight where passengers felt safe. So to Carl, wherever you are now, whether serving time or planning something new with another disguise and false authority, your tools were built for planes, not for people, and your access cannot protect you from the justice you earned. Let us never meet again. Dr. James Morrison had never felt more crushed in his 38 years of emergency medicine. The medical conference in San Antonio ended with the rejection of his research paper, ending his chances at tenure at the university hospital. Now waiting outside baggage claim at San Antonio Airport at 11:23 p.m., he faced the added misery of missing his connecting flight to Chicago because of storms. The gate agent had given him the bad news with little care. The next flight was not until 2:47 p.m. the following afternoon. That meant 15 hours in an airport hotel, plenty of time to think about how his career was falling apart, despite all the years he had worked sleepless nights in the trauma bay. As James stood waiting for the shuttle the airline had promised, his phone buzzed with another text from his wife, asking when he would arrive. He was supposed to be home for his daughter's play at 7 p.m. the next night, but even with the afternoon flight, he would miss it. The guilt of letting down his family on top of his job disappointment was almost too heavy to bear. After 40 minutes in the sticky Texas heat, James saw that the shuttle was not coming. Other stranded passengers had already given up and left, either by rideshare or walking to ground transport. James finally pulled out his phone and ordered an Uber to the Marriott by the airport, hoping to salvage what was left of his terrible trip. The app showed a fare of $42 and an 8-minute wait for the short drive. As he waited at the rideshare pickup zone, watching the late-night traffic chaos, a man approached him quickly, looking like he belonged. "Dr. Morrison?" the man asked, holding a phone that displayed what looked like a rideshare app. "I'm Vincent, your Uber driver. Sorry I'm late. Traffic here has been awful." Vincent looked about 40, dressed neatly in khakis and a polo shirt, presenting himself like an ordinary working man. His car was running right in front of the terminal, with rideshare stickers in the back window. It was clean and professional, just what James expected. "That was faster than the app said," James remarked, relieved. "It told me 8 minutes." Vincent smiled kindly. "GPS was off because of construction. I know the shortcuts. Been working this airport 3 years. Let me grab your bag." He loaded the suitcase in the trunk and made small talk just like any other driver would, complaining about airport traffic, mentioning delays, asking James if he was in San Antonio for work or fun. It felt completely normal. James relaxed in the passenger seat, thankful something was finally going right. Vincent drove off smoothly, navigating construction and traffic lights like he knew them by heart. "Hotel's close," Vincent said. "We'll be there in 15 minutes if lights are good." But after 20 minutes, James realized they were moving away from the airport instead of toward it. The area outside the window didn't look right, and his phone's map showed they were heading southeast, not north where the hotels were. "I think we're going the wrong way," James said, checking his phone. "The hotel is north of the airport." Vincent gave him a quick glance in the mirror, sounding annoyed. "GPS is off again. Construction messes it up. Trust me, I know a faster way." James felt uneasy. Every driver he'd had before relied on GPS and wanted to avoid customer complaints. Ignoring it felt strange. "Can you show me your route on the app?" James asked. "I'd like to see how much longer." Vincent's hands gripped the wheel. "The app's glitching tonight. Probably too many delays on the system. Don't worry, I'll get you there." James shifted slightly, trying the door handle as if stretching. It moved but stayed locked tight. A chill spread through him. Child locks were on. "Why are the doors locked?" James asked, voice tense. Vincent's tone changed instantly. The friendly act was gone, replaced by cold seriousness. "Because passengers panic when they realize they're not going where they thought." James felt fear rush through him with sharp clarity, like diagnosing a critical patient. Vincent was not an Uber driver. This was no real rideshare. "Who are you?" James demanded, grabbing for his phone. Vincent laughed, empty of warmth. "Someone who knows when to take advantage. Stranded passengers with valuables are perfect targets if you study them enough." James felt dread rise. Vincent had been watching airport traffic, picking delayed travelers desperate for rides, people unlikely to question the details. The friendly look, the airport knowledge, even the traffic talk had all been carefully planned. "What do you want?" James asked, trying to steady his voice and think of a way out. "I want your medical credentials, your hospital logins, and your credit cards," Vincent answered calmly. "Doctors are great targets, high credit, sensitive access." James realized this was not chance. Vincent had targeted him on purpose, knowing who he was before approaching him. Using his name, appearing at the right time, acting with complete confidence, it was all prepared. James checked his phone, but it showed no signal. He guessed Vincent had some device blocking calls. They kept driving into darker, emptier roads, further from people. But then, as they stopped at a red light, James spotted Hope, a police cruiser parked at the intersection, watching late-night traffic. Without hesitation, James slammed his hand on the horn again and again, waving wildly toward the police. Vincent cursed and tried to pull James's hand away, but it was already too late.